Before getting into today's stories, let me know where everyone is from and what time so we can send wishes of health and luck to you and your relatives and friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos of our channel. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's get started. Story 1. Nestled in the quaint suburbs of Stonefield, a picturesque town known for its serene streets and historical charm, was the Bellwood House, a Victorian-style home that had stood since the late 1800s. While the house was the pride of the community, its eerie reputation was whispered in hushed tones by the locals. It had seen generations come and go, but its shadowy history remained. The Patterson family moved into Bellwood House during the summer. Elise and Mark Patterson, along with their 10-year-old son Jamie, were captivated by the house's antique charm. For weeks, everything seemed perfect. The garden was lush, the wooden floors creaked with character, and the old grandfather clock in the living room added a touch of elegance. Yet as autumn crept in, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. One evening, Elise sat in the study sorting through some old documents they'd found in the attic. Among faded photographs and brittle letters, she found a diary belonging to someone named Lydia. The entries were erratic, detailing nights of restless sleep, whispers in the walls, and shadows that moved when no one else was there. "Mark, you need to see this," Elise called out, her voice tinged with unease. Mark entered the study, brushing crumbs off his shirt. "What is it?" "It's a diary from someone who used to live here. Listen to this," she read aloud. "October 3rd, 1912. The voices are louder tonight. They keep calling my name. Lydia, Lydia. I dare not turn around." Mark shrugged, trying to mask his discomfort. "It's probably just someone's imagination. Old houses like this always have stories." Elise frowned. "You're not taking this seriously. What if there's more to it? What if it's connected to the things we've been noticing?" Mark sighed and leaned against the doorway. "Like what? The clock chiming? Drafty windows? It's just an old house, Elise." Elise shook her head, gripping the diary tighter. "And Jamie's nightmares? The feeling I get when I'm alone? That's not just the house." Mark hesitated, then softened his tone. "All right, let's keep an eye out. But I'm sure there's a logical explanation." That night, Jamie woke up crying. Elise and Mark rushed to his room, finding him huddled under his blanket. "Jamie, what's wrong?" Elise asked, smoothing his hair. "There was someone in my room," he whimpered. "They were standing by the window. I saw their face." Mark checked the window and found it locked. "It's probably a bad dream, buddy. Everything's fine." Jamie clung to Elise. "No, it wasn't a dream. She was staring at me. Her face was wrong." Elise exchanged a worried glance with Mark. "What do you mean, Jamie? What did she look like?" Jamie's voice dropped to a whisper. Her eyes were black, and her mouth was open, but she didn't say anything. Mark knelt down, his voice steady. "Jamie, we're here. Nothing's going to hurt you, okay? You're safe with us." Jamie nodded reluctantly, but Elise couldn't shake the unease that clung to her. In the following days, strange occurrences became more frequent. The old grandfather clock began chiming at odd hours, even though it hadn't worked in years. Doors creaked open by themselves, and cold drafts swept through rooms with no apparent source. One evening, Elise decided to investigate further. She stayed up late in the living room, determined to catch whatever was causing these disturbances. Around midnight, the air grew heavy, and the faint sound of humming filled the room. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The humming stopped abruptly. From the corner of her eye, Elise saw a figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by dark hair. Before Elise could react, the figure vanished. She bolted upstairs, finding Mark in the bedroom. "Mark, I saw her. I saw the woman Jamie described." Mark's brow furrowed. "What? Where?" "In the living room. She was humming. Then she just disappeared." Elise's voice cracked. Mark sat down heavily on the bed. "Okay, this is getting out of hand. Tomorrow, we're calling someone. An expert or, I don't know, a priest." Elise nodded, her hands shaking. "We can't keep ignoring this. There's something in this house." Elise shared her experience with Mark, but he dismissed it as stress and lack of sleep. Frustrated, she decided to reach out to a local historian, Mr. Harper, who had lived in Stonefield all his life. "Bellwood House," Harper said, his face darkening. "That place has a history. Lydia Hargrove lived there in the early 1900s. She was said to be troubled. People claimed she spoke of voices and shadows. One night, she disappeared. They found her diary but never found her. Elise's stomach sank. What happened to her? Harper shook his head. No one knows. Some say she's still there, waiting. That night, Elise and Mark decided to keep watch together. As they sat in the living room, the air turned icy. The clock struck midnight and the lights flickered. Do you hear that? Elise whispered. A soft voice echoed through the room, singing a lullaby. Mark leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room. Where is it coming from? Before Elise could answer, Jamie's scream pierced the air. They raced to his room, finding him standing by the window, staring outside. She's in the garden, he said, pointing. What do you see? Mark demanded, pulling Jamie back. She's standing by the tree, Jamie whispered. She's watching us. They looked out and saw nothing but darkness. Suddenly the window fogged up, and a single word appeared, written from the outside. Leave. The family decided to spend the night at a hotel. When they returned the next day, the house felt different, as if it were watching them. Elise found the diary on the kitchen table, open to a page she hadn't read before. The entry was chilling. October 31st, 1912. They told me they'll never let me leave. They want company. The Pattersons packed their belongings and left Bellwood House that evening. As they drove away, Elise glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. In the upstairs window, a pale face watched them, its hollow eyes gleaming in the fading light. Bellwood House still stands, waiting for its next occupants. Story 2. It started when my family moved into an old suburban townhouse. My mother, a single mom juggling 2 jobs, was doing her best to make ends meet for my 2 brothers and me. The house was nothing fancy, but it was affordable. However, from the first day, something about it felt wrong. The air was dense, the walls seemed to hold whispers, and the shadows moved in ways that felt unnatural. One evening, my older brother, Kyle, invited a group of his friends over for a casual hangout. Among them was Ethan, the resident daredevil of their circle, who suggested they play a game he'd brought along, a deck of homemade spirit summoning cards he'd found online. Despite my warnings, they laughed it off and began playing in the living room while I stayed in my room, headphones on, trying to ignore them. That night, the house changed. Kyle woke up screaming. When my mom and I ran to his room, we found him curled up on the bed, shaking and pointing at the closet. It's watching me, he muttered, his voice barely audible. We dismissed it as a bad dream, but the following days were anything but normal. One evening, while I was finishing homework in the kitchen, the room went eerily cold. The overhead light flickered before going out completely. In the dim light of my phone, I saw a faint outline of a figure reflected in the window. Tall, skeletal, and wearing a hat. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My dog, Daisy, who was usually calm, began growling low and steady, her eyes fixed on the corner of the ceiling. Daisy, stop, I whispered, but she didn't budge. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed from inside the pantry. I yanked the door open, expecting to find something that could explain the sound. Nothing. The air inside was stale, heavy, almost suffocating. When I closed the door, I noticed 3 long scratch marks on the outside that hadn't been there before. The most terrifying incident happened late one night. Kyle had gone out, and I was home alone with Daisy. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of faint scratching at my bedroom door. I assumed it was Daisy and called out to her, but she didn't come. When I opened the door, I found her cowering under the dining table, whimpering. The scratching continued, this time from the inside of my closet. I stood frozen. My breath quickened as I grabbed the closest thing to a weapon, a baseball bat, and approached the closet. My hands trembled as I opened the door, only to find nothing. But the scratching didn't stop. It was now coming from above. Looking up, I saw faint marks appearing on the ceiling, as if an invisible hand was carving them. They formed a word, L-E-A-V-E. Panicked, I grabbed Daisy and ran out of the house, not stopping until I reached the safety of a nearby diner. My mom didn't believe me when I told her, but Kyle's face went pale. It's real, he whispered. The cards, Ethan. He said he saw something that night, but we thought he was joking. A shadow standing behind me. A few days later, Ethan showed up at our house unannounced, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken. It's attached to you, he said, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would latch on. You have to end it. And what? I demanded, gripping the edge of the kitchen table. What are you talking about, Ethan? What did you do? It wasn't supposed to be like this, Ethan stammered, his voice cracking. The cards, they were just a game. We didn't think. I didn't think. He trailed off, rubbing his temples as if trying to make sense of his own words. Kyle stepped forward, his tone sharper. Ethan, stop dodging. What did you bring into this house? Ethan's hands trembled as he pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a crude sketch of a figure, tall, shadowy, with hollow eyes and long claw-like fingers. It's this, he said, barely above a whisper. I saw it in the corner of the room that night. It didn't move, but it watched us. And when I looked away, I felt it latch on. What do you mean, latch on? I asked, my voice rising. Ethan hesitated before answering. It's like it chooses someone, follows them, feeds off their fear. He looked at me directly, his eyes filled with guilt. And I think it chose you. The room fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do we do? Kyle asked, his voice steady but his hands clenched into fists. How do we get rid of it? I don't know, Ethan admitted, but it's tied to the basement. That much I'm sure of. The basement? I repeated, dread pooling in my stomach. Why there? Ethan shook his head. It's where it's strongest. Whatever ritual bound it, it started down there. That night, Kyle and I ventured into the basement, armed with flashlights. The air was damp, and the faint smell of decay made me gag. In the corner of the room, we found a small wooden box. Inside were strange trinkets, a lock of hair, a cracked mirror, and an old Polaroid of our house with the word bound scrawled across the back. As soon as Kyle touched the photo, the room plunged into darkness. A guttural growl echoed around us, and the temperature dropped sharply. Run! Kyle screamed, shoving me toward the stairs. We barely made it out before the basement door slammed shut behind us. The next morning, the box was gone. My mom insisted we must have imagined it, but Kyle and I knew better. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day. Shadows moved in broad daylight. Whispers echoed in empty rooms. And Daisy refused to enter the living room entirely. The last straw came 2 weeks later. I woke up in the middle of the night to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was the same skeletal silhouette I'd seen in the window. Its head tilted unnaturally, and it raised a bony finger to its lips. Shh, it hissed. When I blinked, it was gone, but scratched into the wall above my bed were 3 words. It knows you. We moved out shortly after that, but even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that it's still with me. Sometimes I hear faint whispers in the dead of night, or catch a glimpse of a shadow that doesn't belong. And every so often, Daisy will growl at an empty corner of the room, her eyes fixed on something I can't see. Story 3. In 2018, my then-girlfriend's family bought a quaint suburban house on the outskirts of town. We moved in with them shortly after the purchase, a decision that felt right at the time. The house was old but charming, with creaky floors and stained glass windows. However, something about it felt wrong. On the first night, as we unpacked, her younger brother, Leo, came running down the stairs pale-faced. Someone was in the hallway, he stammered. We laughed it off, assuming he was just tired from the move. But that was just the beginning. Weeks later, I was working late in the small study near the kitchen. The air felt heavier there, almost suffocating. The dim lamp flickered, and I distinctly heard a whisper. Leave. Thinking it was my girlfriend, Emily, I called out, Hey, is that you? No answer. I got up and looked around, only to find the house empty. Emily had gone grocery shopping. I tried to brush it off, but the whispers became more frequent. Emily, too, started noticing strange occurrences. One night, while we were watching TV, we heard footsteps upstairs. We exchanged uneasy glances. Leo? Emily called. No response. She grabbed a flashlight, and we headed up together. The hallway was empty, but the faint sound of humming drifted from the guest room. We stood frozen outside the door. Should we open it? I whispered. Emily nodded, gripping my arm. I turned the knob slowly, revealing an empty room. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. The window, though locked, was slightly ajar, curtains swaying gently. It's probably the wind, Emily muttered, but her voice trembled. By the following month, things escalated. Lights flickered without explanation. Doors slammed in the middle of the night. The family dog, Max, refused to enter the basement, growling at the door with his hackles raised. Emily's father, a skeptic, insisted it was all in our heads until the night he saw it. It was late. I was in bed when I heard him shouting. Emily and I rushed downstairs to find him standing in the kitchen, pale as a ghost. "I saw someone," he gasped, pointing to the patio door. "A man." He was staring at me through the glass. We searched the yard but found nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched never left us. One evening, as Emily and I were tidying the attic, we discovered a small locked chest. The key was nowhere to be found, but curiosity got the better of us. Using a screwdriver, we pried it open to find a collection of old photographs and letters. The photos depicted a family, a stern-looking man, a timid woman, and a young boy. One letter, dated 1947, read, "We must leave. The house, it won't let us stay. I'm afraid for Henry." That night, Emily's father called a priest to bless the house. During the blessing, Max began barking furiously at the guest room. The priest's face grew grim as he murmured prayers. "There's a presence here," he said. "It's not friendly." Despite the blessing, the activity worsened. Emily started waking up with scratches on her arms. Objects moved on their own. One night, I woke to find Emily standing at the foot of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. "Emily?" I whispered. She didn't respond. I shook her gently, and she snapped out of it, confused and frightened. "I don't remember getting up," she said, her voice trembling. One evening, as we prepared dinner, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Emily broke the silence. "Do you think it's the house? Like something here doesn't want us?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I felt it too. It's not just the sounds or the lights. It feels like it's watching us, waiting for something." "What do you mean?" Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "Last week," I said, swallowing hard, "when you were out with Leo, I heard someone walking down the hallway. I thought it was you, but when I looked, the hallway was empty. And then, I swear I saw a shadow move across the living room wall." Emily's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to scare you," I admitted, "but it's getting harder to ignore. Something's not right here." She nodded, her hands trembling. "Do you think it's the same thing that hurt Max? The scratches on him? They weren't from another dog. They were too deep, too deliberate." I didn't answer, but the silence between us spoke volumes. The final straw came on Halloween. Emily's brother Leo had invited friends over for a movie night. Around midnight, we heard a blood-curdling scream from the living room. We rushed down to find Leo's friend Sarah, trembling and pointing at the window. "There was a face," she sobbed. "A man's face, staring at me." We checked the yard again, but it was empty. Sarah refused to stay, and the party ended abruptly. That night, I couldn't sleep. As I lay in bed, I heard the whisper again, "Leave." This time, it was louder, almost a growl. Emily stirred beside me, and we both froze as the closet door creaked open on its own. A shadowy figure stood inside, its hollow eyes fixed on us. We fled the house the next day, staying with friends while we made arrangements to sell it. But even now, the house doesn't feel empty. Sometimes when I drive past, I see the curtains move, as if someone's watching, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever's inside isn't done with us yet. Maria and Liam had always dreamed of owning a vintage home. When they stumbled upon a charming 1920s craftsman-style house nestled in a quiet neighborhood, it felt like fate. From the creaky hardwood floors to the intricate stained glass window in the living room, the house exuded history. "This place has character," Maria said, running her hand over the carved wooden banister. "I wonder what stories these walls could tell." "Let's hope they're good ones," Liam joked, half smiling. "No ghosts." "Please," Maria chuckled, but her curiosity was piqued. She couldn't resist diving into the home's history. Late one night, while browsing old property records online, she uncovered a chilling detail. In 1935, the house's former owner, a reclusive artist named Charles Hargrove, vanished under mysterious circumstances. His blood-stained studio remained as evidence of foul play, but his body was never found. The case was never solved. Maria kept the discovery to herself, not wanting to spook Liam. But the feeling that the house held secrets lingered, growing stronger with every passing day. A night of whispers. One stormy evening, Maria was unpacking boxes in the attic when she found a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was a dusty leather-bound journal. She flipped it open, revealing fragmented sketches of shadowy figures and hurried, almost illegible writing. One phrase was scrawled repeatedly across the pages. "It watches from the glass. Do not meet its gaze." Her stomach churned. She brought the journal downstairs, where Liam was watching TV. "Look what I found," she said, placing the journal on the coffee table. "What is it?" Liam asked, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed. "This is unsettling." "It belonged to Charles Hargrove," Maria whispered. "The man who disappeared." Liam's face darkened. "Don't tell me you believe in this stuff." Maria hesitated. "I don't know, but doesn't it feel strange here? Like we're not alone?" Liam laughed nervously. "You've been watching too many horror movies. Let's not get carried away." But that night, as they lay in bed, Maria woke to a faint humming. It drifted through the house, a soft, melodic tune that seemed to echo from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "Liam," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" He groaned. "It's probably the wind. Go back to sleep." Maria couldn't shake the sound. She followed it downstairs, her bare feet padding softly against the cold wooden floor. The humming grew louder as she approached the living room, stopping in front of the stained glass window. The intricate colors shimmered in the moonlight, but something about it felt off, like the patterns were shifting. A sudden voice behind her made her jump. "Maria!" It was Liam, rubbing his eyes groggily. "What are you doing?" "Listen," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you hear it?" Liam paused, frowning. Then his face paled. "Is that humming?" They both stared at the window. Maria swore she saw a shadow move across the glass, a shadow that wasn't theirs. The library visit. The next day, Maria visited the local library to learn more about Charles Hargrove. She met an elderly librarian named Mr. Whitaker, who had spent decades researching the town's history. "Hargrove House," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That place is cursed." Maria leaned in. "Why do you say that?" Mr. Whitaker glanced around as if making sure they were alone. Charles Hargrove believed the stained glass in that house was a portal, a trap for a shadow that could mimic the living. He claimed it whispered to him, showed him things no one else could see. "What happened to him?" Maria asked. The old man sighed. "No one knows. But his journal suggests he thought the shadow wanted him, that it would take him if he stared too long into the glass." Maria shivered. "Do you think it's true?" "Let me give you some advice," Mr. Whitaker said, his voice grave. "Don't look into that window at night, and if you hear it whisper your name, run." The shadow revealed that evening, Maria told Liam about her conversation with Mr. Whitaker. He laughed nervously. "Maria, you're letting this get to you. It's just an old house." But Maria wasn't convinced. As the days passed, the strange occurrences escalated. Doors opened and closed on their own. Objects disappeared, only to reappear in places they hadn't been left. And the humming grew louder, more insistent. One night, Liam woke to find Maria standing in front of the stained glass window, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "Maria!" he shouted, rushing to her side. "What are you doing?" She didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the glass. "It's in there," she whispered. "It's watching us." Liam pulled her away, but as he glanced at the window, he froze. In the glass, he saw their reflections, but something was wrong. A third figure stood behind them, its face obscured, its dark form stretching unnaturally across the shimmering patterns. "Let's get out of here," Liam said, his voice shaking. He grabbed Maria's hand and pulled her toward the door. But as they reached the threshold, the humming stopped. The house fell eerily silent. Then a faint whisper echoed through the room. "Don't leave me." The vanishing. The next morning, the house was empty. The neighbors reported seeing Maria and Liam leave in a rush, but they never arrived at their destination. Their car was found abandoned miles away, with no trace of the couple. Weeks later, a new family moved into the house. On their first night, the youngest child stood in front of the stained glass window, staring intently. "What are you looking at?" his mother asked. The boy turned slowly, his face pale. "The nice lady in the window. She says her name is Maria." The stained glass shimmered in the evening light, its colors shifting ever so slightly, as if alive. Story 5. I was around 6 years old when it happened. At the time, I lived with my mom and younger brother Liam. in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Our building was old with creaky floors and dimly lit hallways, but it was home. Across the street was an abandoned church with shattered windows and ivy creeping up the stone walls. At night, it loomed over the street like a silent guardian, or something far worse. My mom worked late most nights, leaving me to babysit Liam. He was a quiet kid, often engrossed in his toy cars or scribbling in his notebook. On this particular night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the power flickered occasionally. "Are you scared?" Liam asked, looking up from his coloring book. "Scared? Me? No way," I said, forcing a laugh, though the uneasy feeling in my stomach said otherwise. "Can we sleep in your room tonight?" he pleaded, clutching his blanket. "All right, fine," I sighed. "But if you kick me in your sleep, I'm sending you back here alone." Liam managed a weak laugh, and we moved to my room. The small comfort of having someone with me didn't last long. By 11 p.m., the power went out completely, plunging the apartment into darkness. The faint glow of the street lamp outside was the only light we had. I lay awake, listening to the wind batter the windows. That's when it started. Tap, tap, tap. "Did you hear that?" Liam whispered. "Probably just the wind," I replied, my voice cracking. "Go back to sleep." But the tapping continued, growing louder, sharper. Knock, knock, knock. "That's not the wind," Liam whimpered, sitting up. "It's coming from the front door." "Stay here," I whispered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'll check." "No, don't go!" Liam grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "What if it's something bad?" "Then I'll scare it away," I said, forcing a grin. "I'm tougher than I look." I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and tiptoed down the hallway. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump. The knocking had stopped, but as I approached the living room, I heard something else. A faint whispering, low and guttural, like multiple voices speaking at once. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The whisper stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" I demanded, flashing the light around the room. The beam landed on the front door, which was rattling as if someone or something was trying to push it open. "Leave us alone," I shouted. A deep, raspy voice answered from the other side. "Let me in." "No!" I screamed, stepping back. "Go away." Suddenly, Liam's voice called out from behind me. "Who are you talking to?" I spun around. Liam was standing in the hallway, his face pale. "I told you to stay in the room," I snapped. "I heard someone," he whispered. "Someone's in the kitchen." My blood ran cold. "What?" "No, the sound came from the door." "No, I heard it," Liam insisted, his eyes wide. "Someone's in there. I saw them." "Stay behind me," I whispered, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. Together we crept toward the kitchen. The sound of dragging, something heavy scraping across the tiles, filled the air. Liam clutched my arm so tightly it hurt. "Do you see anything?" he whispered. I hesitated, then peeked around the corner. There, standing by the counter, was a man in a tattered black suit. His head hung at an unnatural angle, and in his hand he held a long, rusted chain. His back was turned to us, but as the flashlight beam hit him, he froze. "Hello?" I stammered. "Who are you?" The man turned slowly, and though his face was hidden in shadow, I felt his eyes, cold, piercing, boring into me. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The man raised a hand and pointed at the window. "He's watching," he whispered. Liam and I turned to look. Outside, standing beneath the street lamp, was another figure. This one had no face, just a blank, pale surface where its features should have been. It raised a hand and waved slowly. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Liam's arm. We bolted back to my room, slamming the door and locking it. "What do we do?" Liam sobbed, tears streaming down his face. I don't know," I admitted, my hands shaking. "We'll wait until morning." The knocking on the front door started again, louder this time. Then came the dragging sound, circling the apartment. "Do you think they'll get in?" Liam whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled him under the blankets and held him close, trying to shield him from the terror outside. The noises continued, a relentless symphony of dread, until exhaustion finally pulled us into a restless sleep. Epilogue. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows. The apartment was silent. Everything looked normal, except for one thing, a small rusted chain lying on the kitchen floor. I told my mom what happened, but she waved it off as a bad dream. A month later, we moved out. Years later, I returned to the neighborhood and spoke to a woman who lived in the apartment now. She said she'd never experienced anything unusual, but sometimes, late at night, she swore she could hear whispers coming from the kitchen. Story 6. We stood at the cellar door, hesitation thick in the air. Ethan's hand trembled as he turned the rusted doorknob. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered. "We need to know what's down there," he replied, swallowing hard. As the door creaked open, a chill seeped out, wrapping around us like an unwelcome embrace. The steps leading into the darkness seemed endless, each one groaning under our weight. Ethan's flashlight flickered as he tried to steady his hand. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Feel what?" he replied, glancing back at me. "It's like we're not alone." Ethan paused. "Don't say that," he muttered, more to himself than to me. We reached the bottom, the cellar stretching out like a forgotten tomb. Shadows danced along the walls as our flashlights swept across the room. At the far end, the chest sat waiting, almost as if it had been expecting us. "What's in it?" I asked. Ethan knelt beside the chest, his fingers hovering over the latch. "I don't know, but this is where I found the diary." "Wait," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What if it's cursed or something?" Ethan gave a nervous laugh. "You've been watching too many horror movies." But as he lifted the lid, his face went pale. The contents, a dagger, jars filled with dark, unidentifiable substances, and the photograph of the woman seemed to radiate malevolence. "Who is she?" I asked, pointing at the scratched-out face. "I don't know," Ethan said, "but there's something familiar about her." Before I could press further, a loud metallic clang echoed behind us. We spun around, flashlights trembling. "Who's there?" Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. The only response was the sound of shuffling feet. My heart raced as a shadow moved along the far wall. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. "We're not here to hurt you." A raspy voice replied from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan gripped my arm. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then the voice spoke again, closer this time. "The pact remains." I felt a wave of cold air rush past me, and the flashlight flickered. Ethan grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the stairs. "Wait," I said, pulling back. "We need answers." "Answers won't save us," Ethan snapped, his eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the shadow moved into the light, revealing the figure of a woman in a tattered black dress. Her face was hidden behind a veil, but her eyes glowed faintly red. "You broke the pact," she hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Who broke it?" Ethan demanded. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head as if amused by his ignorance. "Your bloodline owes a debt, and debts must be paid." "What debt?" I asked, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at me to run. She pointed a skeletal finger at Ethan. "Ask him." Ethan froze. I don't know what you're talking about." The woman let out a low, guttural laugh. "Lies. The blood remembers, even if you do not." Before we could respond, the cellar door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. Ethan fumbled for the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The air grew thick, filled with whispers. "Nina," one voice called. "Ethan!" The voices overlapped, growing louder, more frantic. "Leave! Leave! Leave! Make it stop!" Ethan shouted, covering his ears. "Tell us what you want," I yelled, my voice cracking. The whispers ceased. In the oppressive silence, the woman's voice returned, calm but chilling. "The pact binds you now." Story 7. I was in 3rd grade when my mom and I moved into an old duplex on the outskirts of town. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but it had a desolate air, with overgrown yards and flickering streetlights. Our duplex was squeezed between a vacant lot and an abandoned church. The church's broken windows always seemed to reflect shadows that weren't there. The house itself felt wrong. The air was heavy, like someone had been breathing in it for years before we arrived. My mom brushed it off, saying, "Old houses creak, sweetie. Nothing to worry about." But even she locked the bedroom door at night. It started with small things, lights flickering, objects out of place, faint whispers when no one was around. I thought maybe it was just the wind or my imagination. But one night, something happened that I can never forget. It was late, and I was sitting at the dining table, finishing a school project. My mom was in the next room putting my baby sister Lily to sleep. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, each second echoing in the silent house. As I focused on my assignment, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the kitchen. It was subtle at first, like a mouse skittering across the tiles. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway. "Mom, is the cat inside?" I called out. "We don't have a cat," she replied from Lily's room. The scratching grew louder, then stopped abruptly. I told myself it was just the old pipes or the house settling, but then came the sound of glass tapping, a rhythmic tick, tick, tick. My heart raced. "Mom, seriously, can you come here?" I called again. "What now, sweetheart?" she answered, her voice tinged with impatience. "I'm putting Lily to sleep. Just check it out. It's probably nothing." I hesitated but stood and crept toward the kitchen, every step feeling heavier than the last. The light switch was on the far wall, so I had to cross the dark room to reach it. The moonlight through the window cast long, jagged shadows across the counters. As I stepped into the doorway, I froze. A shadow moved across the far wall, quick like someone darting out of sight. "Mom, there's someone in the kitchen!" My voice cracked with fear. "What?" Her footsteps thudded toward the hallway. "Stay where you are." But I couldn't stay. My curiosity pulled me forward, even though every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. The tapping stopped. The kitchen was deathly silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I took another step, and then I saw it. The glass on the counter slid toward the edge as if pushed by an invisible hand, and fell to the floor with a shattering crash. My mom burst into the kitchen just as the glass broke. "What's going on in here?" she demanded, cradling Lily, who was starting to cry. "It moved on its own," I stammered, pointing at the shards. "The glass. It slid off the counter. I saw it." She frowned and looked around. "It's just an old house. Maybe it was on the edge, and the vibration made it fall." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "It wasn't like that." Her gaze softened, but there was unease in her eyes. "All right, let's clean this up and go to bed." She put Lily back in her crib and returned with a broom. As she swept up the shards, I noticed her glancing nervously at the darkened corners of the room. Later that night, I lay in bed, wide awake. The events in the kitchen replayed in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been there with us. Around midnight, I heard my mom's bedroom door creak open. Footsteps padded softly down the hall. "Mom," I whispered, sitting up. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a faint voice drifted down the hallway, soft and childlike. "Come play with me." My blood turned to ice. "Mom?" I called again, louder this time. Her door opened with a loud creak, and she stepped into the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" she asked, squinting at me in the dim light. The voice. "Someone's in the house." Her face paled. She grabbed the baseball bat from the hall closet and motioned for me to stay behind her. We crept through the house together, the floorboards groaning under our feet. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift as we moved. When we reached the kitchen, she flipped on the light. It was empty. "See? Nothing here," she said, though her voice was shaky. I pointed to the corner where the glass had fallen. The shards were gone. In their place was a single, dusty handprint on the tile floor, small like a child's. "Mom," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What is that?" She stared at the handprint, her knuckles white as she gripped the bat. "We're leaving," she said abruptly. "Go pack a bag." "But go," she snapped, her voice filled with fear I had never heard before. As I packed, I noticed something odd. My closet door, which I always kept closed, was slightly ajar. Inside, my clothes were pushed to one side, and in the center of the empty space, there was a photograph. It was black and white, old and faded. It showed a little boy standing in front of the duplex, his face turned away. On the back of the photo, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "He never left." I ran to my mom and showed her the photo. She stared at it, her face pale. "We're leaving now," she said. We drove away that night and never looked back. But sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I hear it again. That faint, childlike voice whispering, "Come play with me." I woke to the faint sound of my name, a whisper so soft it felt like it drifted through the walls. My girlfriend Clara, was fast asleep beside me, her steady breathing a contrast to the tension creeping over me. It was 3 a.m., and like most nights, I'd gotten up to use the bathroom. "Alex," the voice came again, faint yet unmistakable. It was Clara's voice, but softer, almost fragile. It seemed to come from somewhere deeper in the house. I stepped out of the bathroom, rubbing my eyes. "Clara?" I called back, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" No response. The hallway was dark, save for the faint moonlight spilling through the living room window. Her house wasn't big. A simple, single-story place with creaky wooden floors that seemed louder in the silence of the night. I tiptoed toward the bedroom, but stopped dead in my tracks when I heard it again. "Alex, come here." The voice was unmistakably hers, but this time it came from the basement door, a door we never used. "Clara?" I called again, louder this time. My heart pounded as I pushed open the bedroom door. She was there, still sound asleep, her chest rising and falling rhythmically. I felt my throat tighten. If she was here, who or what was calling me? The sound of creaking wood behind me made my blood run cold. I spun around, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement in the shadows near the basement door. "Alex?" Clara's groggy voice broke the silence. She sat up, squinting at me. "What are you doing?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Did you call me?" "No," she said, frowning. "What's going on?" I hesitated. I think someone's in the house." Her eyes widened, and she swung her legs off the bed. "What do you mean? Did you see someone?" Before I could answer, the sound of soft, deliberate knocking echoed from the basement door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. We both froze. Clara's face paled. "That came from the basement," she whispered. "I know." My voice barely escaped my lips. She grabbed my arm. "Alex, we need to leave. Now." But something stopped me from moving. The same voice that had called me earlier whispered again, this time louder. "Alex, please, help me." Clara gripped my arm tighter. "No," she said firmly. "We're not going down there." "It sounds like you," I whispered. "It's not me," she hissed. "Whatever that is, it's not me." The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Alex, I need you." The voice trembled, like it was in pain. "Do you hear that?" I asked Clara, my voice shaking. "Of course I hear it," she snapped. "But Alex, don't listen. It's trying to lure you in." "How do you know?" I asked, turning to her. Her eyes darted to the basement door and back to me. "Because I've heard it before." "What?" My stomach dropped. "When?" She didn't answer right away. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "A few nights ago. You were asleep and I heard someone calling my name. From the basement. I thought it was you." I stared at her, the words sinking in. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought I imagined it," she said, her voice cracking. "But now it's happening to you too." The voice interrupted, louder this time, more desperate. "Alex, don't leave me. It hurts." It sounded so much like Clara, but broken, like a recording slowed down and warped. "Alex," Clara said, stepping in front of me. "Look at me. Whatever's down there isn't real. You have to trust me. Don't go near it." The basement door creaked open an inch, and a gust of cold air rushed out. It smelled damp, like mildew and something metallic, like blood. I just want to see," I said, stepping past her. "Alex." "No!" Clara grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Just let me look," I said, my voice more forceful than I intended. She blocked my path. "If you go down there, you might not come back." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full of fear. The voice called again, this time with a sob. "Alex, please. I'm so scared." It sounded weaker, more pitiful. My resolve wavered. "What if someone really needs help?" "No one needs help," Clara shouted. "It's a trick. It wants you down there. It's been waiting for this." Her words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean? It's been waiting?" She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the basement door. "This house. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's not the first time something like this has happened. My dad, before he died, he said he heard voices too, from the basement." I felt a lump in my throat. "And you didn't think to tell me that when I moved in?" "I didn't think it would happen to you," she said, her voice trembling. "It's always the person it chooses." "Chooses?" My voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" Before she could answer, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Clara screamed, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lamp in my hand. Silence fell over the house, heavy and suffocating. Then, from behind the door, a new voice spoke, deep, guttural, and inhuman. "You can't ignore me forever." Alex. Clara grabbed my arm. "We need to leave. Now!" But my legs wouldn't move. Something about the voice rooted me to the spot, a cold, paralyzing fear that I couldn't shake. "What if it follows us?" I whispered. Clara didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with dread. The lights flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw something standing at the top of the basement stairs, a figure tall and shadowy, with glowing eyes that burned into mine. When the lights came back on, it was gone, but the door remained slightly ajar, the darkness behind it seeming to pulse like a living thing. Story 9. It all started when I moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of a quiet New England town. Built in 1878, the house had been through countless families, and its charm was undeniable. Yet beneath its picturesque exterior, something felt wrong. Late one evening, I sat in the dimly lit living room, scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone. My roommate Lily was upstairs preparing for bed, and the house was eerily quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. My cat Trix was perched on the windowsill, staring intently into the darkness outside. Out of nowhere, a faint tap, tap, tap echoed through the room. It sounded deliberate, like someone rapping their knuckles against the walls. Trix hissed and bolted from the window, vanishing up the stairs. "Lily," I called out, half expecting her to blame it on the house settling. "Yeah?" Her voice came from above, muffled but calm. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Another tap, tap, tap. This time it seemed to come from inside the wall behind the old bookcase. My heart raced. "That." A pause. "No, but stay there. I'll come down." Moments later, Lily appeared in the doorway, holding her phone flashlight. "You're white as a sheet. What's going on?" I gestured toward the bookcase. "The tapping. It came from there." Lily frowned, stepping closer to inspect it. "You sure you weren't imagining?" Before she could finish, the sound erupted again. But now it was louder, more forceful, as if someone, or something, was inside the wall. Lily stumbled back, nearly dropping her phone. "Okay, I heard that," she whispered. "What the hell?" We exchanged uneasy glances before I grabbed the flashlight and moved closer. "Help me shift this," I said, pointing to the heavy oak bookcase. "What if it's nothing?" Lily protested, her voice tinged with both fear and uncertainty. "Or worse, what if it's something we don't want to find?" I hesitated but shook my head. "If it's nothing, we'll sleep easier. And if it's something, we need to know." Lily reluctantly helped me push the bookcase aside, revealing a small, square panel in the wall, a crawl space. She immediately took a step back. "Oh, no, no, no. Number that's straight out of every horror movie ever." Ignoring her, I knelt and opened the panel. Dust billowed out, and the faint scent of decay hit me. Inside was a cramped, cobweb-filled space. My flashlight beam caught something odd. A single child's shoe, its leather cracked and faded. Beside it lay a tarnished key tied with a black ribbon. "What is this?" Lily whispered, leaning in closer but keeping her distance. I reached for the key, but as my fingers brushed it, a cold, whispery voice hissed from the crawl space. "Leave it!" We both froze. The word was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably real. Lily's hand clamped onto my arm. Close it now." I can't just leave it," I stammered, my eyes fixed on the key. "Are you insane?" she hissed, panic rising in her voice. "You heard that. Someone or something is in there." I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. What if it's just the wind? Or maybe an old pipe? Lily's eyes widened. Does the wind whisper words? Does a pipe tell you to leave things alone? She shook her head and grabbed the edge of the bookcase. "I'm moving this back. Don't stop me." "Wait," I pleaded, pulling her hand away. What if it's a clue? What if it's tied to the house's history? "I don't care about history," Lily snapped. "I care about not ending up as some urban legend." But something about the key called to me, and before I could stop myself, I reached in and grabbed it. The moment I did, the room grew colder, unnaturally cold. Lily gasped, and the flashlight flickered. "Do you feel that?" I whispered. "Feel it? Look at the flashlight. Something's wrong, she said, backing away. Put it back. But I couldn't. The key felt heavy in my palm, almost alive. I need to know what this unlocks. Why? Lily demanded, her voice breaking. What if it's not something you want to unlock? Before I could answer, the tapping started again. This time it was faster, louder, and it wasn't just from the wall. It was coming from all around us, the floorboards, the ceiling. The very air seemed to vibrate with it. Make it stop, Lily cried, covering her ears. I don't know how, I shouted, panic overtaking me. I shoved the panel shut and we pushed the bookcase back into place, the tapping subsiding the moment we did. For a long moment we stood there, breathing hard. The house was silent again, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. What now? Lily asked, her voice trembling. I held up the key. We find out where this goes. Her eyes widened. You can't be serious. After all of that? I have to, I said quietly. It's not just about the key. It's about whatever's in this house. The next morning, I searched through the house's history and found a chilling story. The original owner's youngest son had vanished in 1892, his body never found. Rumors swirled about a secret room where he was kept hidden away, but nothing was ever proven. That night, I placed the key back inside the crawl space, hoping it would bring peace. As I did, I whispered, I'm sorry. The house seemed to exhale. The tapping stopped, the air lightened, and for a time things were quiet. But last night, I found the key on my pillow, and the word on the floor had changed. It now read, stay. Story 10. Growing up, I always thought my family was ordinary, until my mother remarried a man named Victor. Victor had 2 teenage daughters, both older than me from his previous marriage. Soon after the wedding, my mother and Victor had a son, Nathan, completing our blended family. At first, everything seemed normal, even joyful, but there was something about Victor's past that didn't sit right with me. Victor often spoke about his childhood home, a secluded, weather-beaten house deep in the woods. It had been in his family for generations, but he avoided going back there. When Nathan turned 2, Victor insisted we move into that house, saying it would be perfect for our growing family. Reluctantly, my mother agreed. The house was as unsettling as Victor had described. Tall, narrow, with creaking floorboards and shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Despite its eerie vibe, my mother tried to make it a home. But it wasn't long before things started happening. One night, I was in my room studying when I heard Nathan crying. His room was across the hall from mine, so I went to check on him. As I opened his door, I froze. Standing by his crib was a tall, shadowy figure with what looked like hollow eyes. It didn't move but seemed to stare right at me. I screamed, and the figure vanished. My mother and Victor ran in, but when I told them what I saw, they dismissed it as a nightmare. Things escalated quickly. My stepsisters, Emma and Chloe, began acting strangely. They stopped talking to anyone and spent hours sitting in silence, staring at a blank wall. One day I overheard Emma whispering to Chloe about the man in the cellar. When I confronted them, they both looked at me with blank expressions and said, "He's watching." Then came the voices. At night, we'd hear faint whispers echoing through the house. They spoke in a language none of us could understand, guttural and rhythmic. The whispers grew louder and louder until even Victor couldn't ignore them. One evening, he snapped and shouted, "Enough! Stop it!" The house went dead silent. That was the night Nathan stopped sleeping through the night, waking up screaming about the lady who cries. Desperate for answers, my mother invited a family friend, Sophie, who claimed to be sensitive to spiritual energy. Sophie arrived on a Sunday afternoon and immediately sensed something was wrong. She said the house carried an ancient grief and warned us to leave. My mother begged her to explain, and Sophie reluctantly agreed to perform a ritual to uncover the source of the disturbance. That night, Sophie gathered us in the living room and lit candles in a circle. She chanted softly, her voice trembling, as if she could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, and Sophie's eyes rolled back. In a voice not her own, she whispered, "Victor's family is cursed. It demands blood." Victor's face turned pale. He tried to interrupt, but Sophie collapsed and the room went dark. When Sophie came to, she looked shaken. My mother pressed her for more details. "What did you see?" "What do you mean, blood?" she demanded. Sophie hesitated, glancing nervously at Victor. I saw a man. He's bound to this house. He's angry. His pain runs deep, and he's not alone." There are others, shadows that move with him. What does he want? My mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He wants what was taken from him, Sophie replied. But he's confused. He doesn't know peace. Victor stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Enough of this nonsense. We don't need to entertain these stories. Sophie turned to him sharply. Victor, you know what this is. You've felt it, haven't you? The cold, the whispers. You've seen the shadows. Victor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sophie's voice softened. Please, for your family's sake, tell us what happened. After a long silence, Victor sighed and sat down. There's a story in my family, he began reluctantly. My great-grandfather, he was accused of a terrible crime. They said he killed a child, but he swore he was innocent. The townspeople didn't believe him. They hanged him right here on this land. And the curse, Sophie pressed. Before he died, Victor continued, he cursed the land and anyone who would live here. He said his pain would never end, and neither would theirs. My mother's face went pale. Why didn't you tell me this before? Victor shook his head. I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just a story. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Sophie broke the silence. The man in the cellar, the shadows, they're all tied to this curse. If you don't leave, it will only get worse. Victor stood again, his face red with frustration. This is my family's home. We're not leaving. Sophie looked at him sadly. Then you must prepare for what's to come. The events reached a horrifying climax a week later. We woke up to find Emma and Chloe missing. Their beds were neatly made, but the house felt colder than ever. Victor and my mother searched the woods while I stayed behind with Nathan. That's when I heard it. A knock from inside the cellar. Clutching a flashlight, I descended the rickety stairs, my heart pounding. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, I found Emma and Chloe standing motionless, their backs to me. They were whispering something I couldn't understand. Emma? Chloe, I called out. They turned slowly, their eyes hollow and black, and in unison they whispered, He's here. I don't remember running back upstairs, but when I came to, I was outside, clutching Nathan. My mother and Victor returned shortly after, pale and empty-handed. Emma and Chloe were never found. We left the house the next day, leaving everything behind. Months later, we heard rumors of strange occurrences reported by the new owners. Victor refused to talk about it, and my mother fell into a deep depression. As for Nathan, he started talking to an imaginary friend he called the man with no face. To this day, I wonder if the house still stands, waiting for its next victims. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that house followed us, watching, waiting, just out of sight.